members of the Commission, staff of the Secretariat, interpreters, distinguished representatives of states, NHRIs and civil society organizations. We will continue to finalize the list of speakers that we have called on earlier before we took the floor, took a break. Do we have reprieve? Okay, if we have reprieve, represented by Alexius Kamangila, with observer status 514, kindly take the floor. As you do, please switch on the mic and the video. Thank you.
Shit.
Let's try another one. We don't seem to be to have reprieve online. Do we have Southern Africa Litigation Center? Mr. Sanele Sibia? Okay. How about Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum? Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum. Flavia Zalwango. It looks like that we have the representative of Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum with observer status 496. Please switch on the mic and the video.
Thank you, Chair.
You are welcome. Thank you.
I am here to present a statement for Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum at the 66th African Session on Human and People's Rights, Gambia. Mr. Chairperson and all the distinguished commissioners and delegates, Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum wishes to acknowledge the crucial steps that Uganda has taken in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We appreciate the decisive and timely measures which have so far proven to be very effective in preventing the spread of the virus in Uganda. However, we note with concern that the restrictions imposed have been deliberately or otherwise used to violate the rights of marginalized and vulnerable persons, including lesbians, bisexuals, transgender persons in Uganda on the basis of their real or perceived sexual orientation. We wish to note that on 29th of March 2020, 23 youth were arrested from their homeless shelter for LGBT youth in Chengera, Wakiso district, because they were all male and staying in the same house and had for long been suspected being homosexuals. They were charged with doing a negligent act likely to spread infection of diseases contrary to Section 171 of the Penal Code Act. The 23 were subjected to beatings, tied together with ropes, and marched off in a single file to the police station. 20 of them were remanded in prison, where they spent 50 days before the Director of Public Prosecutions withdrew charges. The withdrawal of charges against the 20 shows that arrests were baseless and the charges were simply to keep them in detention due to their sexual orientation and gender identity. During this period, like most people have been arrested during the COVID period, were not allowed to access, they were not allowed to access their lawyers, and it took the lawyers to get a court order before they were allowed to visit their clients after 46 days of remand. While in prison, the 20 were subjected to towns, frequent beatings, denial of toilet facilities, and in 2 serious incidents, a prison warder ordered other prisoner to examine the anus of the 20 for evidence of homosexuality. And in the other, a prisoner was burnt by a warder with a burning piece of wood. We also note that over 480 arrests have been made in only 3 months. This has increased pressure on prison cells and police cells. We therefore call upon the African Commission to urge the government of Uganda to desist from using COVID-19 situation to violate the rights of LGBT persons based on their sexual orientation, and desist from subject them to institutionalized violence. We urge the government of Uganda to ensure that non-derogable fundamental rights such as right to fair hearing, right to freedom from torture, inhuman and degrading treatment are non-suspended during the state's response to COVID-19. We urge the government to respect the rights to respect its human rights obligation to all citizens as provided under the Constitution of Uganda and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other international human rights institutions. We urge the government of Uganda to decriminalize and declassify petty offenses, as well as adopting alternative punishments for petty offenders in order to decongest prisons and police cells, which might also put different prisoners at the risk of catching COVID-19. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for the statement from Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum, focusing on the human rights situation in Uganda, particularly highlighting the abuse and the arrest that have been perpetrated against a group of young men on the basis of their sexual orientation or real or perceived. We would like the Commission to reiterate the position taken by the African Commission within the framework of its resolution 275, that no one should be attacked or violated or whose rights denied on account of real or perceived sexual orientation. This is contrary to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which entitle all human beings, irrespective of their identity, to be protected from any form of abuse and violence. Thank you once again for that. We also take note of the issues raised relating to access to lawyers, which is one of the important due process rights under Article 7 of the African Charter, and the call for not suspending these due process rights and the prohibition of torture and ill treatment in the context of COVID. COVID doesn't justify at all the suspension of these rights. And also we join in calling for the decriminalization of petty offenses on the basis of resolutions and statements made by the African Commission previously. and importantly, the release of those who are detained and arrested on the basis of petty offenses in order to decongest prisons and places of detention to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Do we have the next speaker? I'm going back to ask if we have REDHAC, represented by Maximilian Ngombe. No? Okay, looks like that we don't have that. How about Reprieve? Let's try if we can succeed to have Reprieve online. Alexis Kamangila, kindly take the floor. Switch on your mic and the video, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. My colleague Alexis is unable to connect, so I will be giving this statement on behalf of Reprieve. Is that okay?
Kindly proceed.
Thank you very much. Honorable Chairperson and Commissioners, I thank you for this opportunity to speak. On this occasion of the 66th Ordinary Session of the African Commission on People and Human Rights, Reprieve wishes to express his concerns that the recent resurgence in death sentences in a number of member states, particularly in the context of superstitiously motivated killings and attacks against persons with albinism. Reprieve strongly condemns that Reprieve strongly believes that persons with albinism deserve effective protection from the state through preventative security measures and community education to combat harmful practices. There is a real concern that COVID-19 will see an increase in such superstitiously motivated attacks, yet member states are ill-equipped to adequately protect persons with albinism and do justice in their cases. Reprieve notes with concern that some member states have instead resorted to a widespread pattern of torture against alleged perpetrators, as well as a blanket imposition of the death penalty for such offenses. The death penalty and torture fails to provide meaningful justice to victims of these abhorrent crimes and merely gives the impression of a tough response. This hides the reality that the measures which tackle the causes of these crimes have been anything but tough. In 2016, the chairperson of the Working Group on Death Penalty, Extrajudicial, Summary and Arbitrary Killings in Africa, and the Working Group on the Rights of Older Persons and Persons with Disability expressed their concern about the continued attacks and the imposition of the death penalty for these crimes in Tanzania. Now, these same concerns have reached Malawi, where in 2019, a suspect was tortured to death by the police, and 2 of his 4 co-defendants were subsequently sentenced to death on the basis of tortured confessions. This, along with 8 other new death sentences, broke Malawi's 4-year death penalty hiatus and amounts to 1,000 increases in death sentences between 2016 and 2020. Every single one of these death sentences was imposed in a case where the victim was a person with albinism. Reprieve wishes to reiterate that torture and the death penalty are ineffective and inappropriate responses to such grave crimes. In this regard, Reprieve proposes the following. As a matter of urgency, the African Commission should develop best practice guidance for the investigation and prosecution of superstitiously motivated killings. The African Commission should make it clear to all member states that these attacks must not be tolerated and meaningful measures must be put in place to meet the needs of victims and their communities. And finally, the African Commission should condemn the use of torture and the death penalty by any of its member states and remind member states of their obligation and progress towards the death penalty abolition and to maintain an absolute prohibition against torture. Reprieve stands ready to partner and work with the African Commission and its member states to implement these recommendations. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the statement of Reprieve,
Thank you.
drawing the attention of the Commission to the continued attacks that is being perpetrated against persons with albinism, with superstitiously motivated attacks, including killings and mutilation, continue to affect persons with albinism in Eastern and Southern Africa regions. Certainly, these are very serious issues of human rights concern for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and we urge states in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa to take the attack against persons with albinism with all the seriousness it deserves, and to extend full protection to these categories of people. In doing so, states, of course, have to comply strictly with the standards and principles of the African Charter, including non-use of torture against those who are suspected of perpetrating violence and killings against persons with albinism. Thank you for your statement once again. Do we have AIDS and Rights Alliance for Southern Africa? Okay, may I ask the next one? Okay, the next one, I understand that the Southern Africa Litigation Center is online. Sanele Shivamba. Looks like that there is a time difference between confirming and disconnecting. Okay, we have Forest People's Program. Do we have Forest People's Program? Okay, if we have Forest People's Program with observer status number 330, kindly take the floor. Please switch on your mic and video. Thank you. Today we seem to be having a lot of difficulties in having smooth connection. Let's try if we have Alliance for Africa. Shall we try to have Alliance for Africa? Okay, let's try. I think the representative of Forest Peoples Program has succeeded to connect with us. Please proceed.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Your Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, honorable commissioners, state representatives, distinguished members of the NGO Forum, ladies and gentlemen. The 700 people whose ancestral lands are centered in the Cherangani Hills in Western Kenya. Our people depend on the forest as a source of food, medicine, and livelihoods, and for the survival of our culture. This is where our ancestors are buried and where our sacred sites are situated. The Sengwere have a traditional knowledge system now captured in written bylaws. This system dictates how our people sustain the forest so that it can sustain us in return. Conserving the forest is also important for all Kenyans. Water, wildlife,
Mr. Kiptum, I think there is a connection problem. We can't really get and hear you properly. Can you check your connection, please? There is a noise that is interfering as you were presenting your statement.
Hello?
Can you try again? I'm afraid that we have lost Mr. Kiptum. Okay. May I request if Alliance for Africa is with us? Alliance for Africa. Alliance for Africa. Mr. Kiptum. May I request if the Minister of Justice, Etwell, which one do we have?
Alliance is online.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm online.
All right. I was unable to see you.
Okay, can you see me now?
I can see you now. This is
Okay.
Alliance for Africa, Observer Status 235. Kindly
Yes.
proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Alliances for Africa is an international African-led NGO that works in human rights, peace, and sustainable development. AFA works with partners in, around, and beyond the continent of Africa, and is a member of the Solidarity for African Women's Rights, a coalition of over 50 organizations working on women's rights in 27 countries in Africa. SOA was formed with the principal objective of advocating for the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, the Maputo Protocol, which was adopted 17 years ago. Honorable Chairperson, Alliances for Africa and SOA congratulate the 4 new commissioners and look forward to working closely with them. More so with Commissioner Kiitsi Zanebo Sylvie, the new Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa. Honorable Chairperson, the ongoing COVID-19 crisis has created unprecedented challenges for women and girls' rights, including an increase in sexual and physical violence, and increased risks of exposure to harmful cultural practices, such as forced child marriage and FGM, and a higher risk of deprivation of social and economic rights, such as the rights to education, the highest attainable standard of health, and the rights to adequate food, shelter, and other basic needs. Under specific provisions of the Maputo Protocol, the COVID-19 pandemic poses a grave risk to the rights of African women and girls to live a life free of violence, to live in peace and free of armed conflict, women and girls' social and economic rights, rights to health, including reproductive health, and the rights to food security. It is important to note that women in distress, including poor women, women heads of households, and elderly women are at higher risk of the enhanced vulnerabilities mentioned in the foregoing. Times of crisis such as this are opportunity to build up on existing systems and design new approaches to guarantee the rights of women and girls in Africa. We urge the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, in concert with government and civil society, to collaborate on ways of safeguarding, improving, and enhancing women's and girls' rights protection during COVID-19 crisis. In particular, we call on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights to stress the need for the full ratification, domestication, and implementation of the Maputo Protocol as one of the legal and political interventions aimed at addressing the effect of the COVID-19 crisis on the rights of women and girls in Africa. Further, we call on the African Commission on Human and People's Rights through its special mandates and mechanisms, particularly the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, to develop and release guidelines and principles on how states can continue to guarantee the rights of women and girls in Africa during this crisis. Honorable Chairperson, women human rights defenders continue to face overwhelming challenges arising from pre-existing gender inequalities that have been exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. We wish to draw the Commission's attention and urge for its expedient action on the situation in Zimbabwe, where 3 women rights defenders were arrested following a peaceful protest, demonstrating the government of Zimbabwe's failure to address hunger facing vulnerable communities amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. They were held incommunicado for 36 hours, during which time they underwent torture, rape, and physical assault. Although they were eventually released on bail, the violence against them has yet to be properly investigated. They still need proper medical attention for their injuries, and they still face charges. Honorable Chairperson, African governments have adopted various measures to address the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the response measures imposed put on women and girls at increased risk of violence and abuse. In Africa, 1 in every 3 women has experienced gender-based violence. Since the start of the pandemic, the number of reported cases of gender-based violence, domestic violence, and sexual offenses has increased in many African countries. We urge the African Commission to impress upon member states the need to adopt appropriate and effective measures that are gender sensitive and gender responsive in order to ensure the protection of women and girls' rights. Honorable Chairperson, African Union member states committed to achieve universal ratification of the Maputo Protocol by 2020. Regrettably, to date, 13 AU member states are yet to ratify the Maputo Protocol. We urge the remaining 13 AU member states, Botswana, Burundi, Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Eritrea, Madagascar, Morocco, Niger, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan, to urgently ratify the Maputo Protocol in order to ensure that the women and girls in these countries enjoy their rights as enshrined in the protocol. Honorable Chairperson, we note the improved number of states reporting on the Maputo Protocol and commend the Commission for its continued efforts towards building the capacity of states to report on the Maputo Protocol in line with the state reporting guidelines issued by the Commission. SOA urges AU member states to domesticate and implement the protocol at the domestic levels. Further, we call on AU member states to comply with decisions rendered by the ACHPR. We continue to urge that the commissioners remain seized of the need to promote and protect the independence of the Commission, especially during these times when health, economic, and political challenges occasioned by the COVID-19 crisis call for much needed leadership in crafting a continental human rights approach to address emerging and lingering challenges and opportunities. Last but not least, we would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Commission on holding this first ever virtual session and to assure you of our collaboration in your continued service to the cause of human rights on the continent. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement on behalf of Alliance for Africa, drawing particular attention to the situation of the rights of women and girls in Africa in the context of COVID-19. Once again, as previous statements during the course of the past several days have highlighted, indicating the increase in violations and abuses against women during and in the context of COVID-19, with a spike in gender-based violence, sexual violence, harmful cultural practices such as early child marriage, the deprivation of socioeconomic rights with the lockdown, curfew measures, and others, and the impact that these measures have, in particular, on certain category of women on account of intersectionality. We join you in reiterating the call for the full ratification of the Maputo Protocol by 13 remaining member states of the African Union. We also take note of the need for ensuring that the response to COVID-19 and indeed the plan for a post-COVID-19 socioeconomic and political order has to be gender sensitive and gender responsive, addressing existing challenge of gender oppression and inequalities affecting women and girls. Let me check if we have the other speakers that we have been trying to connect with earlier on. Do we have the Southern Africa Litigation Center? Okay, good. Southern Africa Litigation Center, represented by Sanele Sibiya. Mr. Sanele, you are welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you, Commissioner. Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Commissioner, State Delegates, national human rights institutions, civil society colleagues, and all distinguished guests. All protocol observed. The Southern African Litigation Center wishes to address the Commission on the rights situation for the LGBTI community in Eswatini, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Malawi in light of the COVID-19 situation. The LGBTI persons regularly experience discrimination and lack social competence when seeking healthcare. As a result, many avoid or delay seeking healthcare even in emergency situations. Moreover, due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, there is limitation in local transport and there is long queues, an overall decrease in essential services, which is worsening the situation of LGBTI persons in Eswatini, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, who are already experiencing discrimination when accessing healthcare services. This can have devastating results on the LGBTI community who may have compromised immune systems as a result of their limited access to treatment due to stigma, violence, social and economic exclusion and discrimination, thus increasing their vulnerability to the COVID-19 virus. It is fundamental that essential quality healthcare services are provided to all people, especially for LGBTI communities in countries where they are not legally recognized. Essential services must include, amongst others, sexual and reproductive health services, management of mental health conditions, HIV prevention and treatment, as well as access to medicinal services for transgender people. During these trying times, attention needs to be given to mental health needs. Persons that identify as LGBTI have a high probability of experiencing mental issues experiencing mental health issues which can lead to suicide because of discrimination suffered at home and in society in general. And as a result, measures urgently need to be put in place to support those that need help and whose conditions might be exacerbated by the social distancing and isolation. In Eswatini, the ROCOFOP has received several reports from LGBTI persons who are alleged to have been victimized in their homes. The ROCOFOP Eswatini has also reported that one transgender woman residing in Lobombo region has continued being victimized and abused at home, where she has been harassed and sometimes denied bus fare to attend school or go to clinic when a need arises. Now that Eswatini has been placed under a partial lockdown, she has made several requests to the ROCOFOP for support as the harassment has increased. The ROCOFOP continues to assist her during this lockdown. In Zimbabwe, Trans Research Education and Training has received requests from a trans sex worker that has severely been disenfranchised during this time, which has rendered her financially vulnerable and placed her at risk. TREAT is continuing to support her during this time. Due to the nature of the current COVID-19 pandemic, we understand the need for deployment of both police and military to ensure that laws are adhered to. There have been continued reports of police abuses towards the LGBTI community, and it is crucial that these reports do not increase during this time. Repeatedly, misinformation and hate speech continues to be exacerbated towards members of the LGBTI community, where we have noted an increase in hate speech as the global pandemic of COVID-19 progresses. Examples of this can be seen in different social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and all print media. For example, on the 9th of March, Pink News published an article whereby a homophobic rabbi stated that the coronavirus outbreak is God's divine punishment for the Pride parades. In conclusion, the global pandemic of COVID-19 is unprecedented, and we acknowledge the different measures being taken across the globe to curb the spread of the virus and save human lives. However, during this time, we call on governments to pay attention on the impact of such limitations and the potential human rights violations occurring towards vulnerable groups such as the LGBTI community. We call on the Commission to urge states to put measures in place to effectively monitor social media platforms and to ensure those who participate in fake news and hate speech towards the LGBTI community are investigated and punished accordingly. And to ensure that media must adopt international best practice codes of conduct against hate speech. We further call on the Commission to urge states to guarantee that access to healthcare for LGBT community is ensured during these trying times. And we further urge the Commission to urge member states to ensure that healthcare professionals are mindful of the needs of the LGBT community in order to safeguard against responsible stigma and discrimination so that they do not discourage them from seeking medical attention during this critical time. Lastly, we call on the Commission to urge member states to ensure that police and military act in line with laws and regulations, and any abuse of power will not be tolerated and will also be investigated and attended to. I thank you for the opportunity, Commissioner.
Thank you for the statement from the Southern Africa Litigation Center, particularly highlighting issues affecting sexual minorities in Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Eswatini. Importantly, issues of discrimination in accessing to health services, mental health issues affecting sexual minorities on account of the COVID-19 situation and the response measures, police abuse. Importantly, you underscored an important issue relating to misinformation and hate speech targeting sexual minorities, which could actually expose the target group to violence, which is contrary to the standards and principles of the African Charter. Thank you for your statement. Do we have the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs of Tanzania? Okay. We don't seem to have indication of the presence of the Minister of Justice of Tanzania. May I ask the Forest People's Program? Forest People's Program. Okay, we have
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have been requested by Yator Kiptum to make this statement on behalf of the Sengwer, as his network was insufficient to make it, and I apologize on that behalf. Your Excellency, the Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Honourable Commissioners, State Representatives, and distinguished members of the NGO Forum, ladies and gentlemen. The Sengwer are a traditional hunter-gatherer people whose ancestral lands are centered in the Cherangani Hills in Western Kenya. They depend on the forest as a source of food, medicine, and livelihoods, and for the survival of their culture. It is where their ancestors are buried and where their sacred sites are situated. The Sengwer have a traditional knowledge system now captured in written bylaws. This system dictates how they sustain the forest so that it can sustain them in return. Conserving the forest is also important for all Kenyans, for water, for wildlife, and for mitigating climate change. The Sengwer share the desire to protect the forests on their lands. Indeed, their culture as an indigenous people depends on it. This common cause should mean that a partnership with the government is possible, yet partnerships can only work when human rights are respected. Sengwer land rights struggles began during the colonial period and persisted after independence due to the establishment of forest reserves on their ancestral lands without their consent. Although initially the Sengwer were able to continue their way of life in the forest, since the 1980s and with increasing intensity since 2014, the Kenyan government has sought to forcibly evict the Sengwer by regularly burning their houses and possessions and the use of violence. This has included use of lethal force, resulting in the tragic death of Robert Korotich in 2018. I am saddened to report that in the last few days, the Kenya Forest Service has burned down 28 homes belonging to the Sengwer community in Embabut Forest. Many adult community members were away from their homes at the time in search of food when the raid took place. meaning they were unable to salvage their bedding and other possessions. Meanwhile, the children who had remained at home fled into the nearby forest, where they watched their homes burn. These events are even more dangerous at the current time in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, contrary to the moratorium announced by the Ministry of the Interior on the 11th of May. This is not just a local problem, but a systematic problem, following similar forced evictions of the Ogiek in the Mau forest in recent days. The actions of the Kenyan government represent an unnecessary, disproportionate and unlawful violation of Sengwer human rights, including their collective rights to property, their rights to religion, culture, and natural resources, and the right to self-determination, all of which are protected under the Charter, as you know. The evictions have impoverished the Sengwer people. Food stores, blankets, uniforms, textbooks are all destroyed when the Kenya Forest Service burns their homes. This has especially serious health impacts for the elderly and for young children who are also unable to attend school. In Kenya, development partners such as the EU and the UNDP are keen to support the government in its natural resource management. However, all such development projects require respect for human rights. One project in particular, the EU Water Programme, was suspended after Kenya Forest Service evictions and the shooting of Robert Kirotich in 2018. The Sengwer have been working hard to try and save that project and to ensure future projects such as the UNDP's can also proceed. But the government, through its actions, are putting present and future development projects at risk. Chairperson, we ask that the African Commission use its good offices and mechanisms to support the Sengwer's desire for justice and a sustainable future, and in support of their urgent plea to the government of Kenya to end forced evictions and dispossession of the Sengwer, as well as of other indigenous peoples and local communities in Kenya. I thank you. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the statement on behalf of Forest People's Program, particularly bringing to the attention of the Commission the issues affecting the Sengwer communities in Western Kenya as communities indigenous to this part of Kenya who live on the basis of traditional livelihoods of hunting and gathering. I in particular take note of the evictions and the burning of houses by Kenya Forest Services, which can have very serious consequences on a wide range of human rights, not only on housing, but also on the right to health, on the right to property, on a wide range of human rights issues in this context. We also take note of the issues relating to the right to land and the right to a sustainable well-being and development of the Sengwer communities, as have been stated in your statement. Thank you once again. I'm not sure if we have other speakers. Do we have Mr. Innocent Bisimwa? No. AIDS and Rights Alliance for Southern Africa. No. Okay. I don't think that we have the Minister of Justice of Tanzania. Can I get confirmation from colleagues if there are other state delegates, delegates of NHRIs or CSOs who have registered to take the floor, other than those who we couldn't connect now? Okay. It looks okay. I am told that we don't have the ones on the list at this point in time, and we don't have a new registration for taking the floor. I think in the light of this, perhaps perhaps it would be good for us to bring today's session to the end and resume our proceedings tomorrow, where we will be starting with the next agenda item on item 5 on cooperation with national human rights institutions and civil society organizations. The Commission will commence reviewing applications for observer status of civil society organizations. We will, of course, also continue to receive statements under agenda item 3. For now, I would like to once again thank my colleagues, commissioners, staff of the Secretariat, ATWEL, for keeping us connected and continuing with our proceedings, representatives of states, NHRIs, and civil society organizations, all distinguished participants. Thank you so very much for your indulgence and for your active participation during the course of this proceeding today. I wish you a very good afternoon, good evening. I will see you all tomorrow virtually at 9 GMT.